think it's safe to say that Indiana Jones is one of those huge powerhouse franchises. All of the films did tremendous box office and got really strong critical acclaim. These are simple, fun, action-packed adventures that everyone can enjoy. But despite their immense and long-lasting success, and obvious appeal to children, there hasn't been much of a toy line dedicated to this franchise over the years. When Raiders of the Lost Ark hit cinemas, there was a supporting toy line from Kenner. This chiefly consisted of a line of 3 3/4 inch figures. Kenner had previous success with this scale with the Star Wars line of figures, and so they replicated that kind of methodology here. So we actually got some vehicles and a fairly expansive line for the first film, to be fair. And there was also this curious release, a 12-inch action figure that is very much in the style of the Kenner 12-inch Star Wars figures. So much so that a cynic might think that they've simply repurposed a Han Solo doll and put him in an Indiana Jones costume. But surprisingly, after this initial line of figures, there really wouldn't be any more for a long time. By the time the Temple of Doom was released, LJN acquired the license and produced a much smaller range of figures. And of course, they are very different to the previous Kenner releases. But after this, there doesn't seem to have been any major toy line supporting the Indiana Jones franchise as the years went by. That was until Hasbro acquired the license for the release of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And Hasbro went all out for a legacy collection. They made 2 lines of figures. They made a 3 3/4 inch and a 12-inch scale. For the 3 3/4, they did pretty much every character you could think of across all the films, and they even threw in a few vehicles and playsets for good measure. And as you'd expect, for their 12-inch scale, this was much reduced to a few key characters, mostly variants of Indiana Jones and Mutt. But amongst these releases was this special deluxe 12-inch action figure, which was the talking Indiana Jones. So, diving straight in, we can see that this is a fairly nicely produced action figure. There's a nice effort here to replicate what we see on screen, and there's enough detailing and textures in the figure to make this quite appealing for collectors as well as children. That said, if you're in any doubt at all who this is aimed at, I can confirm that this figure is aimed squarely at children. You can see that by things like on the chest there, with the holes for the sound to come through from the voice chip, and also the hands being those very traditional sort of 90s Action Man kind of hands that are one piece of rubber that acts as a one-size-fits-all to hold any accessory. But the tailoring is quite nice, and particularly on the leather jacket itself. And all in all, this is quite visually appealing so long as it's viewed through that prism of a child's toy intended for a child. Everything is much simpler. There's not as much detailing, there's not as much texturing or variety in this figure. But there are some nice unexpected little touches. So the actual pockets that they created are actually functional working pockets, which is a nice little touch which I didn't think they would go for. And those holes in the chest can be easily covered up by pulling the shirt together. And you'll notice that virtually all the detailing on the shirt is actually painted, including the buttons. And yet, surprisingly, they have decided to give him functional breast pockets. His gun holster is one tone, one texture, but it does have the strap that actually clips into place on the back there, and it does hold his pistol inside, which is really cool. The pistol itself, again, is one tone, one piece, but it's a nice mould and it looks pretty good, in a very simplistic, toyetic way. It's cool that they give him 2 versions of the whip. They give him a coiled version that sits on his hip, and then this rubber version, which is one long piece, but there is 2 tones to it, which is quite nice. The only complaint I have with it is the fact that his hands can't really hold it very well, so it's always just flopping about there, and you have to angle it in such a way that he can actually hold it. I do like the material they've used for the jacket. It definitely creates that sense of a leather effect. However, something to point out is that over time, it will degrade. As you can see with mine here, over the last few years, pieces of the arm there started to flake and come away. In terms of the likeness, I actually think it's pretty good when the hat is on. It looks pretty solid. When you take the hat off, it doesn't look quite right somehow, and yet you can see they're definitely striving for that Harrison Ford look. But somehow, without the hat, it just looks weird. But one of the really cool added features of this figure is not that it just talks, but actually that his mouth moves as well, and his face is a kind of rubber. And on that note, he actually has quite a lot of sayings. So when you press the button, he really starts to come alive.
My name is Indiana Jones. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? I don't know, I'm making this up as I go. Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory. That's why they call it the jungle, sweetheart. No ticket. Oh, rats.
Now, in terms of the articulation, it's pretty straightforward. He's got a swivel at the neck so he can spin his head 360 degrees. There's no ball joint so he can't look up or down. He's got ball jointed shoulders though, so that means he can lift his arms up and out to the side, which is great. He's got a single jointed elbow, and he can bend his arms about 90 degrees there, which is nice and solid. And of course he's got swivel at the wrist as well, and they are hinged, so that means he can rock them backwards and forwards, which is pretty cool. There's no ab articulation, there's no upper torso articulation, there is just a swivel at the waist. He does have a hinge at the hips there, so he can kick his legs out to the side. He can kick them forwards and backwards as well, a good distance, which is great. And of course, he's got the single jointed knee as well. So again, he can kick that back a good 90 degrees there, which is great. There is also some articulation in the foot there, so it is hinged and it can seem to rotate a little bit, which is pretty good. But obviously, there is nothing in the foot or shoe area. So in terms of accessories, he does of course come with his hat, he comes with his loose whip, he comes with the solid whip that hooks onto his belt, and he also comes with the idol from the first film. As I said before, one of the major issues is the hands that they're giving him, so he doesn't really properly hold any of his props very nicely. It doesn't look natural, and it can be a bit fiddly to get him to hold these things. And whilst the whip is the worst defender, the gun doesn't fare much better either. It's quite a small handle, of course, it's a huge trigger area which he can't get his finger through, so it doesn't look quite right, and of course the gun is quite simple, so you have to be careful how you place it in his hands to make sure he's actually going to hold it, it's not going to fall out, and if you're going to put him on display, then you've got to angle it in such a way that it's not going to look silly. But overall, I have to stress, this is of course meant to be a child's toy, and I think it exceeds expectations when you put it through that prism. I think he's a really fun figure. I love the sound effects. I love the moving head. I think that's absolutely brilliant with the mouthpiece and the rubber face. I think it's excellent. And I think overall the figure is nicely tailored, and the accessories you get are really appropriate and definitely capture the fun and the spirit of Indiana Jones. I hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as I will be posting more videos soon.